Hello and welcome to the bookshelf brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. In this segment, we discuss the latest books relevant and pertinent to the subcontinent. I'm your host, Nithya Subramanian, an editor at the Institute, and with me today is Mr. Asanga Abeyagoonasekera, author of Conundrum of an Island, Sri Lanka's Geopolitical Challenges. The book provides insights into the island nation's contemporary foreign policy and security challenges while also dealing with domestic issues. Mr. Asanga is a geopolitical analyst and former Director General of the Institute of National Security Studies, Sri Lanka, a well-known think tank. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you all.
You started your book on a very interesting, but by sharing two personal experiences. One of losing your father to an LTTE blast, and the other, your own experience of the Easter Day bombing at Shangri-La Hotel, which incidentally marked its second anniversary on April 21st. And that sort of set you on the path of this book. You say that Sri Lanka is geostrategically blessed, that lives with an existential threat due to both its internal politics and external geopolitics. Is this the conundrum of the island?
Yes, you've understood it really well. Yes, that is the conundrum that we are facing as a nation. If you look at even yesterday was the 2 years anniversary of the Easter Sunday bombing. So having witnessed basically at the Shangri-La Hotel with my family and doing the work at this national security think tank at the same time, basically gives me a sort of brings a sort of a perspective coming in from within the administration, as well as a perspective as a geopolitical analyst looking at the geopolitical factors that are affecting Sri Lanka. Especially, I refer to the work of Raja Mohan, where he's mentioning about, he has mentioned in his Samudra Mantram, the power projections, the triple power projections in the Indian Ocean, India, China, and the US, and how that impacts a nation, an island littoral like Sri Lanka, geostrategically positioned in the sea lines of communications. Sitting at the, I bring the geopolitical works of, my previous book, I kind of connected to this also of Nicholas Spikeman on the Rimland, sitting on the Rimland. Sri Lanka is a significant geostrategically positioned. Some of the reviewers see it as, are you comparing sort of, are you prisoners of your own geography? I would say the existential threat is because of the more than 70 years of independence, 30 years have been on a civil war. The rest of the, the largest terrorist attack ever took place 2 years ago, killing so many people from extremism threat. So, and what we see is like two youth insurrections in 1971, 1988. So all of these factors, there's a significant security threat. So the first chapter basically discusses about the importance of a national defense policy and a national security policy. Absence of it, of coherent policies, I think that there's a serious policy, I would say, gap in South Asia, where I bring in works or even discussions at the Indian Parliament by Narasimha Rao, saying that India also requires a national defense policy. So having produced, Sri Lanka has produced its national defense policy in 2019 after about 4 years of work with the Triforces, which is a huge achievement, I think, but it needs to sort of go to the public, get general, ideas, perceptions, scholarly perceptions in, and need to develop further. So the conundrum is clearly the internal instability, be it the constitutional crisis which happened in Sri Lanka, be it the internal, basically the political crisis between the main parties, So there's a deep dive into the democratic fabric of Sri Lanka, how it has moved towards. I sort of see that the democratic the institutions as well as the democratic fabric is moving towards a semi-autocratic, a more state-centric kind of a government right now with Gotabaya Rajapaksa. And so here is where the people, after this undergoing, how the security became a top priority as for the elections and national security. Then I have a piece on bombs and elections, how bombs and elections have a connection, where 5 cases I have looked at in South Asia, be it India, be it in Pakistan or in Sri Lanka, how the voters get affected from bombs. It's kind of unique. When I did that piece, I found that Sri Lanka as well as South Asia is very unique comparing to other regions of the world when it comes to bombs and elections. So it's sort of a deep dive into the instability of the national, the internal, basically the governance as well as the democratic fabric, the instability of the country, and the external factors. So there are specific examples I have given on external instability coming into the country, where Sri Lanka has failed to balance its foreign policy. While rhetorically, most of the leaders speak of the importance of having a balanced, a neutral foreign policy, basically coming from its past non-aligned concepts, where they bring into the election manifesto, but they fail to sort of, in practice, to keep the balance because of the heavy Chinese influence in the country. So I think, yes, this is the conundrum that I've captured.
We will address a few issues individually, but a very interesting comment that you made in the book is on diplomatic disconnect, especially when it comes to the LTTE. We've all read that recently there was a UNHRC resolution to uncover evidence of human rights abuses committed during the civil war. Could you elaborate on that disconnect and also contextualize it to the present?
There's a serious disconnect, be it with the diaspora, Sri Lankan diaspora outside, where I sort of propose an idea, actually, having a diaspora re-engagement strategy to the foreign ministry is really important. Sri Lankan diaspora has not contributed to Sri Lanka, unfortunately, so much. That is, there are few cases, but the larger diaspora is disconnected because of the minority concerns in the country. The suppressing of the minority has been on subsequent governments, has been, a serious issue, where international UNHRC, basically what's happened right now, and there's a piece that I've written saying that the withdrawal is not the way to go. The government decided to co-sponsor its own resolution in 2015 and commit to the UNHRC. And then subsequently, another foreign minister who went after a few years said that we are not with the hybrid court, we would like to have our local internal mechanism. And a few years after that, you have a minister going and the foreign minister saying that we want to withdraw. So the inconsistency of these policy decisions amplified at the global theater, be it the Human Rights Council or any other global institute. So this is a serious issue that the country is facing. The minority concerns are there. Be it the Tamilian issue, now it's added a new factor, is added the Muslim concern, which is after the forced cremation in the COVID time as well as. So there is adding on to what we already have. And so the book discusses of importance of reconciliation. As a direct victim losing my father, I understand the importance of reconciliation. The genuine reconciliation is what is required with the diaspora. here the problem is the selective. The government, the present government, is always is choosing a selective method where it does not wish to reconcile with the terrorists, or they call it the terrorists, any of the terrorists. So once a terrorist, there was, I mean, like what the one of the government officials was saying, that once a terrorist, you will always remain as a terrorist. So that you cannot do reconciliation with that mentality. So you need to sort of bring them rather than disengage with them. So right now, I mean, a few weeks ago, you see the banning of several organizations. So you're not going in the right trajectory towards achieving genuine reconciliation. And this resolution right now is a serious concern because of multiple promises for the last 13 years that the Sri Lankan governments have made, as well as not, there's not been much results out of these, whatever we have spoken about. So it's, I would say the government would need to focus much more on this issue, because it could emerge again. And I mean, definitely, because how I see it is because Sri Lankan society, even the economic conditions are not so good in the northern province or the eastern province. There are a lot of economic challenges. So there, I mean, the environment is still conducive for this sort of, resurgence of, another uprising. So, I mean, back in the 1989, no one predicted that there would be a youth insurrection that would, so disastrous at that time. And it did happen at once. So I think it's really important, on the human rights issue to be addressed much more. Rather than sort of being selective, as well as having this disconnect, will not help. And seeing the Human Rights Council resolution as a Western conspiracy, I mean, that's what some of the the present government has mentioned, that it is not a Western conspiracy. They are not. And India's involvement, I mean, in the provincial councils. I mean, recently I saw where saying that India is imposing this, and it's not. India is not imposing provincial councils. The provincial council elections have not been held for a long time, and provincial councils are really important. It basically is a mechanism to capture the minority concerns, the issues that are there in the north, and they made it inefficient. The government made it inefficient, so to show that, look, we don't need the provincial council. But no, provincial councils is an important basic instrument.
A considerable part of your book is also dedicated to China and the Belt and Road Initiative, as well as how Sri Lanka is trying to balance China with the United States. An interesting observation that you make is that the Beijing factor is deeply polarized. Do you feel this remains prevalent even today? And is Sri Lanka not really caught in a debt trap with China? Something that you've again said in the book as being overstated.
Yes, when you look at the Chinese loans in Sri Lanka, although it is projected as debt traps, I mean, if you look at the general perceptions from the general public, they're not seen as debt traps. But the Chinese loans, I mean, there is a narrative saying that, look, the volume of Chinese loans are much less than the commercial borrowings and the sovereign bonds. But that's not the question. I mean, the question is that the opaqueness of the Chinese loans, it's a serious issue, as well as the strategic, what are the strategic motives behind this? This is where I bring sort of the geopolitical essence to my work. If there's no ships, not much of ships coming to Hambantota, is there a sort of a strategic dimension to that project? If there's no flights coming into Matala, is there a sort of a strategic, are they looking at a strategic project, turning it to maybe a civil military sort of projects. Djibouti is something I have referred also, and looking at what's going on right now in the island, like the port city project, which the Chinese as well as the government has agreed to work to give an extra jurisdiction or economic zone with tax exemptions and all that in the heart of Colombo. I see a serious strategic dimension to these projects and how it would impact our foreign policy. Right now, I mean, I see that there's no balance at all. I mean, the book basically discusses about why we're losing the balance and why we prefer to bandwagon with China. Less questions asked. So the borrowings has been very clear. I mean, last week there has been again another borrowing. So China is the most preferred partner. The Rajapaksas are back in the 2014 or 15. So you're back to the same, the China, basically the more sort of a China tilt than the rest of the or India or the US. So the balancing is what is required, but unfortunately you don't see that balance. And it's due to, I mean, there is a sort of a discussion I bring in, but it needs further work. Basically, does these projects, will it transform into affecting the political models within the political parties, for example, or the political models? That's something I'm right now working on. I mean, how much of these projects would impact the political part, be it the SLPP or the CCP, SLPP. If you look at the Rajapaksa's 20th Amendment, as well as what's going on, I mean, losing the independent commissions, as well as, so you are heading towards a new model. The 28 military appointments that has been highlighted by the Human Rights Council. I mean, the only nation that would support this sort of, political model is China. So there would be I would say, the CCP and SLPP will have very close, I mean, the recent seminar is a clear example where Basil Rajapaksa, the political, the brain behind Rajapaksas, was saying that this is the model we should adopt. The Chinese model. And the recent phone conversation on March end with President Xi and President Gotabaya again clearly highlights that where Rajapaksa, Gotabaya Rajapaksa was saying to President Xi that we need to use the Chinese model for rural development. So it's sort of a slow inroad coming, I mean, slowly sort of coming in and to this Sri Lankan and democratic fabric or the institutions. So this is a serious danger that I see. And you will depart once you bring in these essence one by one. So you will sort of move away from the rules-based order or the Indo-Pacific. You cannot be with the Quad. You cannot support India. You cannot. So Sri Lanka has always been with, I mean, committing its work to the law of the sea, Indian Ocean Zone for Peace, with international norms. And we have committed so much. I have referred to a few people who has done tremendous work, the law of the sea, as well as, so these things have to continue. But unfortunately, you won't be able to do that because you are departing from these values.
It's very interesting that you bring in the Quad, because that's my next question. You have touched upon maritime power dynamics between India, China, and the United States. We all know that the Quad leaders met in March this year, strengthening the Indo-Pacific strategy. How has Sri Lanka viewed this, and how will it shape its relations with India going forward?
The Quad I discussed, I've been bringing Kennan's work on containment, then again, liberal hegemonic work on, Mersheimer's wall. What really happened, take about a few weeks ago in Anchorage in Alaska was a clear, basically the Chinese aggressiveness pointing out that, don't dictate terms to us. So you see a significant, build up of this Cold War mentality coming up. But in this, now, I see, there is a area which I captured in the present moment on the COVID environment, how China would sort of, strengthen its aggressiveness, the wolf warrior style in islands like Sri Lanka, or the recent visit of Yang Jeki in October to Sri Lanka clearly highlight that, giving a binary choice that, be with us and, not with them. Then you have the Mike Pompeo's visits and be with us, not with them. So it's sort of a binary choices given. So I sort of pushed them towards being with the middle powers. So Sri Lanka can always work with many nations, middle powers, then getting stuck with these binaries that, be with us or them or whatever. So be with all, but then work with middle powers. The Quad is really important for a nation like Sri Lanka because of its geostrategic position, because where you have the spheres of influence already in the island. It's a clear, you could see from the embassy Twitter feeds what's going on, how much of significant influence that we are facing. So we don't have a clear-cut foreign policy written, or Sri Lanka sort of, I basically say that we are hedging, the most preferred partner, and doing also the contradictory thing that we really want to do. And so we hedge. So this is, nations like Sri Lanka should work very closely with India and the norms of the basically, what we have stood for back in the past, the rules-based order, and it's how it's important that we balance it. Because BRI, Rajapaksa, it was Mahinda Rajapaksa who subscribed to it from the initial stage, and Sri Lanka was one of the initial partners of the BRI. And I bring a dimension from BRI. Okay, we look at BRI in South Asia, but is there a BRI in Central Asia, like Kazakhstan, the KICA, CICA move, what's happening in there? So it's more of a sort of a wider, like an Olympian view, try to capture all of it, but then, and focus on the local issues. And is there sort of an impact to the local domestic issues as well? So they try to see the connections, and a reader could actually, benefit by seeing some of those connections and working on their own papers, which you would see like some of the reviewers saying that you should have done a little bit more on this particular paper. I agree with them because, due to the constraints, of course, there is a limitation. But yes, it is an opening to work a little bit more on those areas and explore more, on Quad, for example. But Sri Lanka, you see from regime to regime, from previous regime to this regime, so there's a significant shift. The balance, we've been losing quite a bit, and now it's completely clear with, moving away from the MCC, Millennium Challenge Corporation grant with the US, the status of force agreement with the US, as well as the Japan's light railway project. So that's also been rejected. So most of those were the grants as well as the projects have been. So you see a tilt towards China, and it's a preference, and it's a calculated preference.
And finally, talking about domestic politics, your book refers to the instability factor, but now we have the SLPP in force with the Rajapaksa brothers holding both the presidential and prime ministerial offices. Do you think now there is more stability now on the domestic front?
Yes, this is the first time that Sri Lanka is having a sibling regime. And so where basically start the chapter with a quote from Lee Kuan Yew, actually, where he says that, look, I prefer Machiavelli when it comes to power. A stronger state is better. What Sri Lankan people, after 2019 Easter Sunday bombing, what majority wanted was stability, and they didn't want to see this sort of carnage or human suffering, multiple bombings, as well as this significant national security threat. So they wanted to give more power to the state and bring stability. So that's Gotabaya Rajapaksa was obviously the best possible choice at that time, being the security defense secretary, as well as knowing the subject so well, was chosen as the president. Now, taking over after the power, so he has managed to bring in the 20th Amendment to shift the power from the legislature towards the executive, and strengthen the executive much more. So Sri Lankan state basically has been sort of shifting powers between legislature and executive. From Sirisena's time, if you look at the previous president to now. So I see there is a sort of a corridor that we are working on between the state and the civil society. So while Sirisena tried to strengthen the civil society, Gotabaya tried to strengthen the state. So there is, what we have, the window to work basically is very narrow. And where I capture it, a piece on Leviathan, where people are asking for a Leviathan. And this was actually before the bombing, the piece, and then I wrote that. I felt that the people they were making a lot of on the news and saying that Sirisena is not a strong leader, and what we need is a strong leader, and that would solve our development problems, our economic problems. But unfortunately, Singapore has been referred many times because Singapore is the most, preferred nation back from 1970s, that we need to be like, follow the model. Surprisingly, Gotabaya Rajapaksa highlight words like technocracy. So it's quite interesting where I bring in some of the works of, technocracy, as well as, where technocracy like Parag Khanna's work in Singapore. And but the problem here is that the society is quite different, as well as the when you look at the two countries, you cannot sort of compare, and you can. I don't think there is a sort of easy recipe that you can bring in because of the deep-rooted social issues, the political challenges, and also the the historical factors, especially with India, where I call it the Kaveri Delta effect, the Tamilian effect to the northern part. Then I also examine the ultra-nationalist Buddhist sentiments that are there in the country. So how would you sort of, bring in these values? So it's sort of a challenging atmosphere right now. But unfortunately, what's happening right now is that the state is strengthening its, it's going beyond its limits. And what you see is a reduction of democratic space. And this is a serious concern for the international community. So, for example, the military appointments should have been in a different way of, rather than this taking on the government administration, civil service servants positions. So we would have looked at there are different models to look at. A nation like Sri Lanka could, having a large military, of course, we could use their, their expertise. So there is basically a serious issue on the civil space, or suppression of the civil space, as well as the reduction of the democratic space in the country. So I bring those discussions as well as the analysis of Leviathan or John Locke's work on strengthening what you want civil society. How do you have a balance?
Thank you so much for this conversation. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.